Hey, what's up, everybody? Jason here, your V professor. And some of you may not know this, but I'm actually a real teacher in my day to day. And I actually wanted to expand a little bit more in terms of my content. So I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring on those AP YouTube personalities, but from a different perspective. Today, what we're going to be looking at, we're going to look at Unit 0 as a refresher course. This is kind of stuff that you need to know before you go into the class, and it's things that, well, you should have learned, but I know it's summer. I forget things too. What you've learned about in World Geo or AP Human. So let's go ahead and take a look. Nothing too serious here. And if you have any questions, by all means, leave them in the comment section below. I try to answer them as best I can. So, important, put myself right here. All right, so first thing is very important. Let's talk about vocabulary in this particular refresher. Now, we're going to come across some words here that you might not be familiar, you don't remember, such as animism, egalitarian, city-states, polytheism, cuneiform, monotheism, centralized, decentralized. Those two words are going to be extremely important for the next couple of units. Patriarchal, another big word. Mandate of heaven, BCE and CE. BCE and CE are just going to be common references towards time. BCE stands for the before the common era, and CE for the common era. All right. So if you want to take a time to pause and take a look at all of this, by all means, you're more than welcome to do so. Let's go ahead and move on. This slide shouldn't, this presentation shouldn't take too long. I'm just going to focus on some key ideas here, and I would just want you to kind of just roll along with me. If you want to take notes, you're more than welcome to do. If not, hey, you can always come back. So let's talk about human migration. Human migration started about 300,000 years ago when the first humans came out of the savannas of Africa. Now, we formed small hunter-gatherer groups. We were very nomadic. And we developed tools, been able to control fire, developed art, and also spiritual beliefs. This is that idea of animism. All right. And then roughly by 10,000 BCE, humans inhabited every single continent except Antarctica. And you could probably understand for obvious reasons as to why that was the case, right? Now, for thousands of years, this was the rule. But eventually, an exception would formulate and everything would change human history. So what exactly changed? Well, humans began to farm. That is, the basic summary here. So humans produced more food, populations grew, and growing populations changed everything. Now, this is one thing I want you guys to really understand as you step into this class, is that this is a common trend. When humans figured out how to store food for longer, added foods to our diet, our population grew exponentially. So keep that in mind. So whenever your teacher discusses new food technology or different ways of harvesting, you should already know what's going to happen in the future. And that is a boom in population. So now, because of this boom in population, we start to see that, well, we don't always need a whole lot of farmers. In fact, we need people to make tools. We need government. We don't really need, never mind. I'm not going to get into that. But the idea is that, governments, laws, taxes, and writing all come about because now humans have more time to do stuff instead of chasing after their food. On top of that, social classes start to pop up and we develop inequality in some aspects, all right? And we begin to compete over land, water, and resources. Nothing's really changed since the agricultural revolution on how humans act. Well, we've changed, but, our baser instincts still kind of take things into account. Now, the one thing that we are going to focus on in AP World History, or at least to have an understanding to get you ready for the exam, is women's issues. Now, what we have to understand is when we were hunter-gatherers, everybody pulled their own weight, and women were seen as vital, useful people within our tribe. When we started to develop agriculture and we started to also, collect and gain more stuff, the idea of women started to change. Their usefulness only came about in certain aspects, like maybe the home, rearing children, or stuff like that. Okay? If you don't like that fact, I'm sorry. I'm just reporting history. It's not me. All right. Now, the other thing is too that is also a common theme that we see. Societies that have very little show more aspects of egalitarianism. Societies that have abundance, they start to restrict and stratify themselves or divide themselves into classes. All right, so let's keep moving. Now, we're going to introduce a couple of major empires here from, early in human development. The first one that we're going to look at is Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia was one of those empires that developed along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is going to be an important theme, at least in this particular unit. Now, because of the flooding that happened along these rivers, this created a lot of fertile soil. So humans who are farming are naturally going to go somewhere where they're able to farm in and have abundance in crops. So this is where it started to happen. And as people collected and gathered, we had entire towns turn into cities. Not overnight, but it seemed like it. Then we see the development of what are called city-states. This is kind of important. So, make a note of that particular word. All right. And these city-states developed around the idea of agriculture. Then we start to develop hierarchical societies within Mesopotamia, ruled by kings and priests. Now, the one thing we've kind of shifted from animism to having a multitude or Parthenon, not Parthenon, excuse me, that's a building in Greece, pantheon of different deities for different things. A god of the river, god of the harvest, god of love, etc., etc. So that is called polytheism. So the religion itself centered around what are called ziggurats. You don't really need to know what ziggurats are, but if you're curious, this is what they look like. Now, on top of that, Mesopotamia engaged in long-distance trade with Egypt. We do know that, and also a civilization that we know very little of in the Indus River Valley. Now, on top of that, because they wanted to understand or at least keep record of everything that they were doing, cuneiform was created. Now, cuneiform is this image right here next to me, where you see the little lines and shapes. That's cuneiform. That's earliest forms of writing that was meant to keep record of taxes, trade, laws, and also stories. One famous story is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I highly recommend that you get a chance to actually take a look at. But we have a couple of civilizations that are, important to note. You have the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians. All right, let's move on. Next civilization on the block here is Egypt. All right. Now, you're going to notice a common theme. A river is where they all got started. Now, the Nile had predictable flooding, which helps out because humans were simple creatures. We don't like to overcomplicate things, right? Now, flooding supported agriculture, population growth, and political unity. Now, Egypt is very different from how Mesopotamia was, in the sense of, well, for one, the pharaoh was seen as divine. And on top of that, it was a very centralized form of government. Now remember, if you have to go back as to what centralized means, go back, take a look, by all means, so you can have a better understanding of it. Now, they also developed a polytheistic religion that emphasized nature and the afterlife. Really cool stuff, actually. In fact, the equivalent to the afterlife for the Egyptians, the way I would look at it is pay to win. All right, they had this thing called the Book of the Dead, and if you had enough money to purchase it, you could be buried with that book. And the idea was that book is going to show you how to navigate through the land of the dead to get to, their form of heaven, all right, in the afterlife. But of course, they had to pass the last test. Ancient Egyptian religion is absolutely interesting. They also developed a form of writing called hieroglyphs. This recorded religious and government activities. Then you also have advances in mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. So if you do not like math, all right, you can blame the Egyptians. It's their fault. All right. Women in Egyptian society had a little bit more freedom, and I'm going to use that word in quotation marks. All right. Women possess significant liberties compared to Mesopotamian society. In fact, one of the big things was that they were allowed to own property and they had legal rights. They were able to initiate divorce if they so saw fit, which is absolutely pretty interesting. Now, of course, this is the exception, not the rule. So, key takeaway here is that geography helped make Egypt wealthy, unified, and stable. Now, one thing about AP that I really do enjoy is that we do get to come out of Europe and Asia, and we do eventually look into Africa and also the Americas, because, remember, after the last ice age, there was a land bridge that connected Asia and the Americas. When the last ice age ended, that land bridge melted away, and now these people were completely isolated from the rest of humanity, or at least their origins, right? So development was very different for them in some aspects. Now, the first group is Olmec. Now, the Olmecs lived in present-day Mexico along the Gulf Coast. They would build these monumental Stonehenge, and they would influence later Mesoamerican traditions, and they're considered a cultural foundation for other Mesoamerican tribes. Okay? In fact, the Olmecs were known to participate also in that ball game that we like to see. If you ever watched the movie El Dorado, highly recommend it. Great film. Not to mention, well, it features the ball game. Then you have the Chavín in present-day Peru, along the Andean highlands. They were not conquerors per se, but they were influencers, which is pretty awesome. So they had a ceremonial center that was known as Chavín de Huántar, a huge temple complex, absolutely amazing. With the earlier stages of what you should remember, Hinduism becomes a big deal. All right. Now, this developed gradually in South Asia from Vedic and local traditions. We have a pretty decent idea of where these customs came from, and they settled in this Indus River Valley. Again, we don't know too much about the Indus River Valley civilization because we cannot read the ancient texts. So we have no idea much about them. But they did exist, and this is part of what eventually would become the Hindu religion. So what we do know is that the Brahmin are at the top. They are the ultimate reality. Then, of course, you have reincarnation, the cycle of rebirth, karma, actions shape future lives, moksha, which is the liberation from rebirth, and then religious ideas reinforce social hierarchy. There's this thing that we will talk about called the caste system. Very strict, very rigid, no way out of it. Hinduism supported the concept of this social stratification based off of these beliefs. Now, also too, outside of the polytheistic range, there were also monotheistic religions. Okay? Now, if polytheistic means many, monotheistic has to mean what? That's right. One God. One sole creator God. Now, the granddaddy of monotheism, or at least what historians believe to be, the eldest form, is Zoroastrianism. This developed in ancient Persia, a representation of goodness and truth under one particular deity, Ahura Mazda, and there was this constant struggle between good and evil. Sounds kind of familiar, right? And it should, because a lot of historians believe that Zoroastrianism influenced Judaism, which eventually influenced Christianity and Islam. Now, Judaism has been around as well. It's one of the earliest monotheistic traditions. The people known as the Jews or Hebrews or Israelites, they believe that they have a covenant or a promise between God and the people of their tradition. And they have a book called the Tanakh, or Tanakh. I can't pronounce it because I'm not Hebrew. But this is what is the Old Testament in Christian religion. Now, solid ideas so far, right? Have you caught on to it? Do you need to go back? Take the time out to go back and take a look at some of this information. Again, this is just a refresher. It's not meant to be anything big, okay? The bigger content's coming up next, after this one. All right, let's talk about the classical era, 600 BCE to 600 CE. Now, one religion that we're going to be looking at is, well, Buddhism. This showed up around the 6th century BCE. A guy by the name of Siddhartha Gautama, he wanted to answer the lifelong question as to why are humans suffering? Now, the one thing that we also have to know about Siddhartha Gautama is that he is part of the Hindu elite. He was part of a Hindu family, and his actions would eventually lead to a philosophy and also religion that counters Hindu belief. All right. So I know there's a common misconception that Buddhism is strictly like Chinese or Japanese or Southeast Asian. It's not. It got its origins in South Asia, specifically India. So it was, I'm not going to say it's the equivalent to what happens between Roman Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Protestantism, but it's definitely, it does take some aspects from them. So the Buddhists have a specific path that they follow. The one thing that they do follow is that life is about suffering, which I can relate, by all means. I'm not a Buddhist, but I can totally relate to this concept. Attachment causes suffering. Geez, this sounds more like, like they're Jedi than anything else, right? Yeah, well, anyways, ending attachment can end suffering. So in other words, we like our stuff. We're attached to because we like it. And the only way that we can end the fact that we suffer is by not being attached to the things that we like so much, right? Mind you, this is a very basic overview. This is not a deep dive into Buddhism. This is just my way of breaking it down so you understand it. Okay, so I don't want to see comments like, "Oh man, he's being terrible about this." No, I'm giving you a basic explanation so you can understand the concept here. Now, the Eightfold Path leads towards enlightenment. That's kind of like the big deal. That's how you break the cycle of reincarnation. All right? The ultimate goal is to achieve nirvana, where you are eventually, you understand the universe and life. And this ends the suffering and the rebirth of life. All right. Hinduism, just like they believe in reincarnation, all right, you're reincarnated and it's all based off of karma and dharma. Buddhists take this aspect of reincarnation and says, hey, you don't have to be reborn into this world. All you have to, because living is painful. So therefore, if you don't want to live every time you come back in a painful way, this, achieve enlightenment, achieve nirvana. Isn't that something? All right. So, Buddhism spreads across Asia. Buddhism offered a path to enlightenment regardless of caste or birthplace. This is extremely important because this is what makes Buddhism attractive to the lower castes of India. People who cannot get out of their station in society. And so they look to the idea of Buddhism because Buddhism says, I don't have to be reborn as, this part of the same lower caste. So, now, the greatest thing about Buddhism sends out missionaries, they build monasteries, and they also spread because of trade routes. We have the ideas behind the Ashoka, who supported Buddhist missions. Monks and nuns formed religious communities called monastic life. We'll talk more about monastic life later. And merchants carried Buddhism along the Silk Roads. Local cultures would adapt to Buddhist teachings. So South Asia, Central Asia, and East and Southeast Asia were all influenced by Buddhism. Hinduism was more of a adherence to a particular culture. That's one thing that separates Buddhism and Hinduism. Hinduism restricted itself to a particular culture and did not really seek converts like Buddhism did. Buddhism was universal. All right. Now let's talk about the big one, China. Now, China is going to be very big in Unit 1. We're going to talk about China and its influences. Mostly, let's go ahead and talk about what sets up China to become a major influencer. So, China had this concept called the Mandate of Heaven. It's pretty an interesting idea. So, you have an emperor and his family, the dynasty, right? Well, legitimate authority came through this idea that heaven grants the ruler legitimacy, which is going to be important to know. We'll talk about the word legitimacy later. So just understand that this is just legit in terms of their authority. And that heaven favored these individuals, so therefore they have a right to rule. Do not confuse the mandate of heaven to divine right in Europe. They are completely different, and here's how. With the mandate of heaven, corrupt rulers can lose authority because maybe they're ineffective, maybe there's some type of natural disaster, famine, rebellion. All of those things point to the mandate of heaven that this particular dynasty and this particular family has lost favor and therefore need to be replaced with something else. So, when this happened, we see a lot of peasant rebellions in China that would eventually shift into a new dynasty. Now, one of the major things that we start to see, especially after a fall of the dynasty, is a warring states period, where individual warlords are fighting for power, trying to dominate one or the other, so they can become the next emperor, because they all believe that they have the mandate of heaven. A philosopher by the name of Confucius, believed in certain aspects that were extremely virtuous. One being education and benevolent leadership. Also, piety to the family, respect for the family and those people who are in charge. And all of this, if you did all of these things, you valued education, you had a really good leader, you respected your ancestors and family, specifically the males of the family. All right, this is a patriarchal society. Extremely important to know. So when they're talking about respecting for the family, they want you to respect the family, yes, but specifically the male leadership of the family. Okay? Now, these ideas would shape China for more than 2,000 years. Pretty crazy, I know. Now, on top of that, we have some other ideas that we need to take a look at. Taoism, another philosophy. While Confucius was out there saying you should, be good people, Taoism focused more on you should probably touch grass. Because Taoism focused a lot on harmony with nature, simplicity and inner reflection, and you follow the Tao, or the way. Okay? So Taoism and Confucianism would influence Chinese society and Chinese history, but Confucianism would do the most, would do a lot of the heavy lifting. So one dynasty in particular that we need to know that's in the background is the Qin dynasty. Unified and standardized China. They also centralized rule through legalism. You don't need to really worry about what legalism is, but if you're curious, just ask the question away and I'll answer it. Then you have the Han. Okay? The Han would step in to replace the Qin after the Qin would lose favor of the mandate of heaven. Remember, every time there's a dynasty that takes over, it's because the previous dynasty lost the mandate of heaven and therefore was replaced. Okay? So the Han would take in next. they liked a lot of the things that the Qin did, and so they kept them. They also promoted the Confucian government style. They liked the idea of, well, you need to respect the emperor and the male, entities of government and also of the family. So therefore, they promoted Confucianism as the government philosophy. Now, this is going to be a big important detail, because here's the thing. Because of their promotion of Confucianism would eventually lead to what is going to be called in Unit 1, all right, the civil service exams. We will talk more about that coming up soon. Now, the Han also expanded trade along the Silk Roads. In fact, under the Han, the Silk Road would get its first golden age. Okay? The Silk Road is actually very, very old in terms of trade between Europe and Asia and everything in between. But there were high moments and low moments. So what eventually happens is that the Han fails. And when the Han fails, the Roman Empire fails. And we'll talk about the Romans coming up soon. The Silk Road kind of slowly dies out. And it's only revitalized a little bit later. Actually, much later. So what we have here is one particular Western Eurasia, Persia and Greece. Two distinct cultures, vastly different in governance. The Persian Empire was very multicultural and also centralized. Ancient Greece had hundreds of city-states. Some of the more famous ones are Athens and Sparta. Athens being the book nerds and Sparta being the military nerds of the past. And they were completely different. This just goes to show you that even though you are the same cultural group, there's still ways of how things were ran differently. So keep that in mind when we talk about independent city-states moving into the future. All right? Now, another thing. Rome. Everybody loves Rome. And I wish I could teach an entire class on the Roman Republic and how it eventually grew to an empire. But it's not important right now. At least not for the greater scope of AP world history. Rome united the Mediterranean. In fact, the Mediterranean was known as the Roman Lake. It was their sea. All right? That's how they referred to the Mediterranean. Now, Rome expanded through military expansion and also provincial governments. They built roads, they built ports, and they protected trade routes. Extremely important if you want to build an empire this large. Eventually, we see that Rome kind of fell, right? Well, why did Rome fall? Well, there's no really particular reason as to why. There's actually a lot of things as to why Rome fell. When you have such a large empire such as Rome, logistically, it's almost impossible to make sure that trade flourishes properly, that there's very little to no corruption. Its military was never in an area to where it could secure trade for too long. What eventually we start to see the rise of various types of Goths. Yes, Goths, not these Goths, but those Goths. So make sure you know the difference. All right. Now, eventually there was a split in Rome. You got the Western Roman Empire, which people are more versed in and have more of an idea of. And then you have the Eastern Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, which eventually would be called the Byzantine Empire. We'll talk more about the Byzantines coming up really soon. All right. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Christianity. Christianity is extremely big, so Jesus has officially entered the chat here. All right. Now, Christianity emerged from Judaism within the Roman Empire. Followers of Jesus proclaimed that he was the Messiah or the Savior of humanity. So therefore, his followers became known as Christians. This is why that's why they are called Christians. All right. If I didn't give myself away as a Christian, there you go. Now you know. Now, salvation was available regardless of social status. Another universal religion looking at, well, other groups of people and wanting to convert them. Missionaries carried Christianity across Roman networks. persecution failed to stop its growth. The Romans did not like Christianity. The reason why they didn't like Christianity was the same reason why they didn't like Judaism. Jews and Christians refused to accept the divinity of the Emperor of Rome. And so, because of this, Romans didn't really take too well, even though that they were polytheistic and generally tolerant as long as people accepted the divinity of the emperor. Now, eventually, this is going to change, right? Because in 313, Constantine becomes, well, Christian, and he grants religious toleration to the Christian faith. Then in 380, you have the Nicene Christianity becomes Rome's official religion. So, hooray! They don't get fed to the lions or be made into human candles. That's an actual thing. Again, I could talk about Rome for a long time, but hey, let's move forward. Now, I told you we'd talk about the Byzantines. All we really need to know about the Byzantines is that they're the Eastern Roman Empire. They considered themselves Roman and, in fact, the last true Romans. Okay? They were the bridge that connected Europe and Asia for trade, and they had a huge imperial and religious capital. That capital being called Constantinople. All right? Present-day Istanbul. I'm still kind of sore about it, but that's regardless of that fact. All right, Constantinople was the capital of the Eastern Empire and also the religious capital of Eastern Christian tradition. Now, there's a guy by the name of Justinian. He is well known for quite a few things. One, the Hagia Sophia. Massive church, which is now a mosque. And we'll talk about what happened there. And then you have Justinian's Code, which preserved and organized Roman law, and in fact becomes the foundational understanding of what law is up to the 19th century, which is pretty cool. So as you can see, Rome has a massive legacy, or at least the Romans do. Now, I'm going to leave you with this one last question, and you can answer this in the comments below. Looking at the civilizations that we discussed today, what lesson do you think humanity still hasn't learned? Now, go ahead and have this discussion in the comment section. I will also be there looking and observing and adding my 2 cents. So, I hope this overview helped clear a lot of things, and if it didn't, by all means, please ask a question. All right, questions are extremely important. This is the reason why, teachers exist, is because students exist to ask questions, not just to sit in the back of the classroom and, play on their phone. Because I know that's probably what you did throughout this entire lesson. You probably had me playing in the background, let me talk, and you were on your phone. And if you're not shocked by this, it's because I'm an actual teacher. I know what students do on a regular basis. So I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. And if you like what you saw, oh my God, my voice cracked there for a second. I think I was hitting puberty again. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button, throw me into the algorithm, share this video with any other people who might need it, and then also subscribe for more content. I don't only just do this, I also play video games and I live stream, but I'm also going to be adding some future lessons. So I will see you in the next one, guys. Take care of yourselves and each other. God bless. I'm out.